Hey, this is Rob. Welcome to part 2 of my snakeskin snare drum build. This is where I left off on the last video. I had done the 3D carve on the outside of the shell. The next step will be to add the badge or logo on the side of the drum. You wouldn't think that would take a whole video, but I didn't make this the simple way, and you've probably noticed I don't like simple. So let's look at where we are right now. This is basically where we are right now. I'm going to put the badge right here on this dome, and the process I was planning was to carve a pocket there like that and fill it with black epoxy. Once that black epoxy had cured, I would put bronze or gold colored epoxy there. Let that cure overnight. And last step, I would put the white epoxy or pearl in that spot right there. After it's done, then I would sand it smooth so it's flush with this dome. In the end, it did not work out. I've done this a few times with other drums, and the issue is, of course, epoxy is very liquid and it wants to run down the side of the drum. Kind of obviously, gravity's going to take effect. What I've done in the past, I've had the drum actually rotate while it's curing, so there's no low spots, no high spots. That worked relatively well, but the big problem is air bubbles. When you're doing epoxy, about every 10-15 minutes after you've poured it, you want to pop the bubbles with either a heat gun or a blowtorch. Works quite well, and in the end, there'll be no bubbles in there. When it's rotating, gravity doesn't let the bubbles go to the top because there is no up and down. It's always continually changing. So I always had bubbles. So I've also tried using a thickening agent in the epoxy, and again, that's worked relatively well, but kind of the same issue. Air bubbles form, but it's so thick that they can't rise to the top and be popped. So there's always kind of a problem with getting consistency right, getting the nice smooth finish with no bubbles. This time I was planning I would have the CNC rock back and forth while it's curing, and that way there'd still be generally an up and down, and the epoxy would, the bubbles would flow through epoxy and you could pop them. The other problem on this drum compared for that method is the other drums I've done this with were smooth cylinders. This one, of course, has a 3D texture to it. A smooth cylinder is much easier to work with. Obviously, some is going to leak out of the area or not stay contained, but on a smooth cylinder, you just get out the electric sander and you can remove that epoxy in a few minutes. No big deal. Sanding away excess epoxy on this drum is done by hand or by hand with a Dremel. It's with tiny tools, hours and hours of sanding. I tried this the first time. I circled it with tape, tried to get it attached nice and smooth very well, and then with the tape I made a little bit of a wall or an edge around that so it would contain the epoxy. First time I tried this, it didn't work. It leaked under the tape, and to get it full enough here, it would go over the edge. A lot spilled out. So I quickly got out paper towels and wiped up what I could. And I tried again with getting the tape even a little better seal, and again, same issue, failure. And plus that meant I had a lot of sanding to do to get rid of the epoxy that I couldn't get up with a paper towel while it was wet. Next thought was, in some drums in the past, I have done a 3D shape of my logo, the snake with the drumsticks in its mouth, and I'll probably throw in a picture of a previous drum with that. It worked okay, but in the end, I couldn't get it to look right on this mound the way it was. If I was doing this from the beginning, I would have had the snake scales around that and just pop up out of that. So I was not happy with the 3D renderings I could get that way. So in the end, I decided I would carve my epoxy inlay onto a flat piece of walnut and then inlay that piece of walnut into this dome. Made a lot of sense. The walnut would be a nice dark color wood, which would match the real drum, has that dark there. So the walnut should tie on great. I can do this on a flat surface, so I wouldn't have any of my gravity problems. I could get the bubbles out. So this video is basically about me doing that epoxy process on a flat piece of walnut that I will glue into this drum in the end. I decided to make 4 badges, and hopefully I'll get 2 good ones out of that. I'm using walnut, as I said before, and basic wood tends to chip a little bit when you get fine detail carving like I'm doing. So I first put a layer of epoxy down, let it soak in, and hopefully that will harden and strengthen the wood so I'll get a better finish in the end. The CNC is carving the snake head into the 4 badges at this point. I originally was going to fill that with a gold copper color, and it's too close to that wood color. So I'm going to go black on this instead of the copper like I originally showed. And of course I'll do white with the drumstick and text. That'll pop really nice. Here's a quick overhead shot of the snake head carved into the walnut. Looks like my epoxy trick has worked very well because I can see no chipping. It's very good condition at this point. We've skipped quite a bit ahead at this point. I've already filled the snake head with the black epoxy, and I carved the text and the drumsticks. And now I'm going to fill with the white or the pearl epoxy. I'm using, it's called mica powders in the epoxy, and it gives a really nice swirl effect with that pearl coloring. I really like this one. I've used it on some other projects and real happy with it. Once I pour it in, I'll use a toothpick, and I'm going to try to stir it up a little bit for multiple reasons. You want the swirl effect to look good on that, and also I'm trying to get in the nooks and crannies so I get rid of any tiny bubbles that didn't come out when I poured it in there. So 2 reasons for that. After a full day for the epoxy to cure, I'll skim off the top of the epoxy to get down to the bare wood. Normally I'll go high and creep up on it, but actually this time I got it just right the first pass. That's actually a little scary because I was afraid I might have gone too deep the first pass, but it appeared to be perfect. So let's see what it looks like when it gets done. And here's the top view of that same piece we just did. Little tattletale marks, it'll sand out, it'll be nice. And I wet it down to see how it'll look once we have finish on it. I'm very happy at this point. I skipped ahead a little bit here. I skimmed the back of the badge off to get the total thickness to 100 thou or 1/10 of an inch. I was going to heat this up and bend it, and I realized it was already very pliable, so I just got it damp. And I'm going to put it into a shape that is already the shape of the drum. That's the 13/875 rounded edge, and I've got a male and a female piece that will form that. And it's already wet. I will clamp it down, and I'll leave it for several hours till it dries out, and we'll see how it comes out when I'm done. Here are a few still shots of that after I popped it out of the mold. As you can see, the rounded shape is exactly what I'm looking for. It fits to the drum near perfect, so I'm real happy at this point. Now I'm going to insert it into the pocket I have on the drum. I purposely cut this out a little bit big, so I know it won't fit at this point. I'm using my detail belt sander, or power file it's sometimes called. This is really a nice tool for things like this. I really like this strange thing. I'm going to keep test fitting it for quite a while here, probably 10-15 minutes if I slow this down to actual speed. Just keep shaving off the little edge where it's a little wide, and in the end, it will fit very well into that pocket. Now it's time to glue the badge into the drum. Put some glue obviously in the pocket and also on the back of the badge. No one ever accuses me of using too little glue. In my mind, if I go a little extra, no big deal. If not enough, then you've ruined a project. So I use plenty of glue on there, and I'll put some on the back of the badge too. It fits very nicely, as we saw from the last video. To put even pressure on that, I'm using the top part of that mold that I used to conform to the right shape. I put some tape on the inside of that, so even if there's some glue on the edge there, it'll hold it down evenly and won't stick to the badge. So no big deal. I'm using a strap clamp here to put some nice pressure on that. Strange little issue with that, because the lugs stick out there, it was kind of hard to get the strap clamp aligned exactly how I wanted. I got it in the end, no big deal, but it took longer than I expected to get that to work, but in the grand scheme of things, that's a minor issue. So I'm getting it aligned perfectly, and then I'll screw it down so it's nice and tight. We'll leave it there for a couple hours so we have a nice good seal, and we'll move on to the next step. The next step in my process, I'm going to cut a channel around the badge, then I'll fill that in with black, and it'll really highlight the badge so it looks perfect, I think, in my mind. Though, at this point, you can see I'm not actually cutting. It took a while to align the CNC perfectly where that channel is going to be. So I did multiple steps and adjusted by a few hundredths of a degree to get this perfectly lined up. I finally got it just right. So here is just a test, and the next step, you see me actually cutting that channel. Now I'm cutting the actual channel. I'm using a 2mm end mill bit, which for those of us who think imperial, that's a little over a 1/16 of an inch. So the channel is not very wide, not very deep. Just want to score it enough that I can put some black, it'll be black super glue in there actually in the end, but just enough to make that work out right. It took much longer to align that than to actually cut the channel. Here I am getting ready to put the black CA glue or super glue into the channel. A couple of things I want to point out first. You notice the badge is shiny. I did put a layer of finish on that because I did not want any of this finish, this black CA glue, or the wood glue to soak into the pores on that if I spilled over. So I did that to seal it, not actually to get a good finish. And here I'm spraying the accelerator on that super glue so it hardens up immediately. I don't want it to run downhill. I'm still fighting that gravity issue a little bit, but nothing like it is on that epoxy when it's flowing over the edges like crazy. So keep filling that channel, and you can see I went over a little bit there. That will sand out in only a few seconds, no big deal. But if I wouldn't have sealed this first, that would be a major heartache. You'll keep seeing me spray the accelerator on there to harden that immediately. I'm looking for low spots in there. I'll build it up a little too high there and then sand it down to get it nice and flush. You can probably tell this one is not sped up. This is actual speed. I'm probably wasting a little too much time having you watch videos this way, but it's nice to see something that's actual speed instead of me speeding up 10 times actual for it to work to watch. And again, I sealed the drum around those edges too. So again, a little bit flows on the edge. It's not going to soak into the drum. That was a big deal. So almost done here. And you can see I'm touching super glue when it's dry. That would be a no-no if it was not dry or hardened with that accelerator. And after only a few minutes drying time, it's ready to start sanding. My goal at this point is just to take off that little bit of lip I have on top from that channel. Shouldn't be too hard, though in the end, the badge doesn't conform perfectly right. So I spent quite a bit of time sanding this and getting it right, and me being a perfectionist, I want it to be perfect. So I'll show some other tools I showed later. I was hoping originally just do it by hand with a block and sandpaper to get it nice and smooth, but I ended up using some Dremel tools. Actually, that belt sander worked pretty good to get a few spots lower that were a little high. But then again, a lot more finishing on that because that's a little aggressive. Then you have to clean up the marks it leaves. So I'll show some tools I used in a second to get it perfect. I didn't spend much time of me videotaping the sanding process, because that's a good way to have everyone leave the video fast. But these little rotary sanding pads on my Dremel did a fantastic job on getting that texture just right, getting the rounding edges perfect. I had bought these years ago and had not used them in a long time, and ended up being the perfect tool. I was searching for a good way to get that smooth texture, and this was the tool for me. You also see the other thing I use with the brushes on the end. Those work good for nooks and crannies, though that's more in the finishing of the drum instead of that badge. But those are the tools I used a lot in the finishing process. And here I am skipping forward a little bit to where the drum is today. You can see I've finished around the drum, or I'm working on finishing the drum at this point. But the badge, the dome shape, the rounding, I am really happy with it in this photo. It's come out very well in the end. I'm so happy after I had the mess up with the epoxy, but this turned out great. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a like, and if you'd like to see the rest of the series and be notified, please subscribe to my channel and you can see the future videos on this drum build. This is video 2, and I'm planning on 4 or even 5 videos to finish up this process. So I appreciate you watching, and I'll enjoy talking to you later. Thanks.